Welcome to this explainer. We've all been there, right? You're just passively scrolling through a forum, you read a relatively simple question, and suddenly, out of nowhere, the comment section completely explodes into this deep, intense debate. Well, today, we are unpacking a meticulously documented academic case study of exactly that, an online religious dispute. It's a journey that starts with everyday relatable human anxiety and then plunges straight into ancient history, philology, and the very nature of reality itself. It is a wildly fascinating ride, so let's just jump right in.
Imagine logging on to a religious forum and seeing someone drop this absolute bombshell. Calling the God of the Bible evil is pretty much as provocative as it gets, right? But the crazy thing is, this wasn't just some standard internet trolling. It was actually a deeply philosophical argument pulled straight from the first few centuries of early Christianity, abruptly resurrected in a modern digital space. So what on earth prompted such an intense accusation?
To figure that out, we have to rewind to the very first comment in the thread. It all started with an incredibly vulnerable, deeply human question from a user feeling inadequate. They wrote a post confessing their self-centeredness, their lack of respect, and their genuine fear that they were fundamentally repulsive to their creator. They just wanted to know, is he angry with me? It's a classic pastoral plea for comfort and grace. And yet somehow, this simple search for peace is what set off an absolute powder keg of a debate.
Section 1. An innocent question takes a radical theological turn. This pastoral question instantly triggers a massive theological shift, and it introduces our core cast of characters. First, we have the vulnerable inquirer. That's our original poster, who's just looking for some spiritual reassurance. Second, jumping right into the thread, is the Gnostic advocate. This user brings a highly critical, radical, dualistic perspective, totally tearing down traditional views. And finally, stepping into the fray to counter the Gnostic is the Orthodox defender, a user heavily armed with classical Christian theology and historical context. The stage is totally set for a massive collision of worldviews.
Section 2, the Demiurge and the Ancient Problem of Evil.
Right out of the gate, the Gnostic advocate completely bypasses any sort of pastoral comfort and introduces a major concept from early Christian history. They argue that the creator of our physical world isn't actually the highest God, but rather a demiurge, which is basically an imperfect architect responsible for the suffering in the matrix of reality. According to ancient Gnostic belief, the true supreme God is purely spiritual and entirely good, completely detached from our messy, painful physical world. The physical world, they claim, was built by this demiurge, a flawed and sometimes arrogant lesser being. So, the Gnostic essentially tells the inquirer, the reason you feel so much anxiety and see so much evil is because the creator of this specific world is actually part of the problem.
And to back this up, they drop a literal reading of Isaiah 45:7 into the forum like a total mic drop. If God says, I create evil, well, according to the Gnostic, this proves the God of the Old Testament is the malevolent demiurge, not the supreme father of light. It's a really striking, seemingly undeniable piece of textual evidence. I mean, how do you even argue with a text that literally says, I create evil?
Section 3. A philological battle over defining evil.
Well, this intense accusation pulls the Orthodox defender right into the ring, and they know simple Sunday school answers just aren't going to cut it here, so they break down the intricate Hebrew syntax of the verse. They point out that the text uses three very distinct verbs for creating. Yotzer is kind of like a potter shaping existing clay. Oseh refers to everyday practical making. But bara? That is an exclusive, majestic verb reserved in the Old Testament only for God's profound creation out of absolutely nothing. By using bara in connection with darkness, the defender argues, the text is emphatically stating that absolutely nothing, not even the darkness itself, exists outside of God's sovereign authority.
So here's the absolute crux of the argument. The ancient Hebrew word ra doesn't actually mean moral wickedness or sin in this specific context. It means historical calamity and physical disaster. This is where the translation creates a massive, massive misunderstanding. You see, the verse is built entirely on poetic opposites. Light is paired with darkness, and peace, which in Hebrew is shalom, meaning prosperity, wholeness, and health, is paired with ra. So in this context, the opposite of prosperity isn't moral sin, it's physical disaster.
Looking through this linguistic lens, the Orthodox argument really clicks into place. God isn't claiming to author moral sin. He's declaring that he alone controls both prosperity and historical disaster. When modern people hear the word evil, we immediately think of malice and injustice, but the ancient audience hearing ra in this poetic structure understood it as calamity or hardship. The Orthodox defender points out that God isn't saying, I am malicious. God is saying, I am the author of history. I bring times of profound peace, and I bring times of devastating hardship.
But wait, it gets even more interesting, because the Orthodox defender adds this fascinating historical layer. They argue this verse was actually a radical pushback against Persian religions that believed in two completely separate gods of light and dark. Imagine the ancient Israelites in exile completely surrounded by the Persian religion of Zoroastrianism, which basically taught that a good god of light and a bad god of darkness were locked in this eternal equal war. Isaiah 45:7 is essentially a bold political and theological manifesto. It loudly declares, "No, there are not two competing gods. There is only one sovereign creator, and he is in charge of the whole shebang."
Section 4. The clash over the historical authority of Scripture.
Totally unconvinced by the ancient linguistics lesson, the Gnostic advocate hard pivots. They argue that parsing Hebrew is basically pointless if the underlying text itself is corrupt. They go totally on the offensive, labeling the Bible a document of human power struggles. They cite things like the centralization of power by King Josiah and the priestly financial laws in Leviticus. The Gnostic strips away the holy label entirely, pointing to the brutality, the ethnic cleansing, and those highly convenient financial laws that definitely benefited the ancient priesthood. They see the Bible not as divine revelation, but as a deeply flawed, highly edited piece of political propaganda designed just to control the masses.
So now we're staring at this completely irreconcilable gap. The Gnostic demands logical perfection, while the Orthodox embraces the profound paradox of a text being completely human and completely divine at exactly the same time. The Gnostic says, hey, if it has human flaws and historical editing, it literally cannot be divine. But the Orthodox defender leans right into that tension. They argue that classic theology doesn't view the Bible as a book dictated directly from the sky like the Quran. Instead, it's a paradox. It's 100% the messy work of human history and simultaneously 100% inspired by the divine.
In response, the Orthodox defender counters with a passage from Hebrews chapter 5, suggesting that grappling with these messy textual paradoxes is actually the solid food required for mature faith, not a reason to just abandon it entirely. They point out that those easy Sunday school simplifications, that's just milk. Facing the dark parts of history, the textual edits, and the incredibly difficult verses, that is the solid food of a mature worldview. The Orthodox user is essentially arguing that faith isn't about ignoring the Bible's historical complexities. It's about wrestling with them deeply.
Refusing to back down, the Gnostic makes one last hard appeal to logic, questioning how any honest believer can accept late textual additions and contradictions across the four Gospels. They point out that the four accounts of Jesus' life don't perfectly align, and some beloved stories, like the woman caught in adultery in John, were actually added centuries later. How can a rational person base their entire life on a text that is constantly shifting under the microscope of history? It feels like a checkmate for pure logic. At this point, the debate has reached an absolute fever pitch of intellectual combat.
Section 5. Returning to the human essence of faith.
Right when this academic debate is hitting a total boiling point, the Orthodox defender does something completely remarkable. Bypassing all the intellectual warfare, they gently turn right back to the original inquirer. They leave all that heavy theological armor behind and speak directly to the person who started it all, the person who just wanted to know if God was angry with them. They reframe this terrifying, incredibly complex supreme being of the debate back into the simple image of a father dealing with a child. Ultimately, this wild ride down the internet rabbit hole leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. When we strip away all the ancient Hebrew and the deep Gnostic philosophies, are our worldviews ultimately shaped by a strict demand for logical consistency or by a fundamental, deeply human need for pastoral grace? This case study brilliantly shows us that our digital debates, no matter how intellectually complex or heated they get, almost always stem from very deep, very vulnerable human needs. So, the next time you see a massive argument unfold online, ask yourself, what is the vulnerable question hiding at the very bottom of the thread? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.